are up here. We only have one item on the agenda tonight, and that's the budget presentation. I'm sorry, not the budget presentation, the budget forum. We'll talk about issues related to the budget. After that, we will have an executive session to discuss a contract negotiation with the board. We go into private then, that's not done in public as executive session, so you're free to stay, obviously, if you like, but we'll conduct any further public business afterwards, so I wouldn't suggest it because there really will be nothing happening afterwards anyway. So we'll have the presentation, and then we'll have question and answer from anybody, and then we'll go into executive session, which will be the end of the public meeting for tonight. So with that, I'm just going to close the curtain, the shade, because the sun's in my eyes. Nope.
Are all the clocks slow so the employees stay after work?
It still doesn't work that way.
Try as I might.
Would it help if we turned the light off or two? Is that too hard to see? Too light? That's good enough?
That'd be fine.
All right. So why don't we get started with the budget form? And Jason, if we go to the first slide, we're going to just go through some budget basics to begin with so people all have the same understanding of what the budget really means when we talk about the town budget. First of all, we have many different funds within the budget. It isn't just one budget. And what we have is really the three main funds is typically what we focus on. The town, what we call the general fund, or the O1, or in some cases people call it the A fund, is a budget of about $3.8 million, almost $4 million. And that fund is essentially applied to every resident in the town, including that a little bit differently than a town without a village, for example. So that brings us to the B fund, or the O2, which is the town outside the village. And that's really a fund that is assessed to every town resident who does not live in the village. Village residents are town residents, but this fund applies to everyone outside of that. And that's really to avoid duplication of services, and we'll get into a few of those examples in a few moments, but that's a $5 million fund. And then the third major fund, which is the O4, you would think it would be the O3, but it's the O4 fund, the highway fund, which is a $3.6 million budget, and that's applied to the town outside village as well. And then we have a variety of other funds, and some residents are in them and some residents aren't, depending on where they live and what services they receive. But the sewer and the water, sewer being 1.3, water being 2.5, and then a whole bunch of special districts from there. One thing to note is the fire districts, aside from Fire District 4, which impacts the residents who live in that district, the town board does not set the fire budgets. Those are set by your volunteer fire company that you live in. So Buchendall sets the Buchendall budget, Allplaus sets the Allplaus budget, and so forth. They do become, it does roll up into the town budget and is eventually adopted, but those fire departments set their own budget. And so when they bond to build a new fire department, for example, that's the authority of the fire commissioners within that fire district. That's not a town board function. So the total of all our budgets ends up being almost a $17 million budget that we end up with at the end of the year. So just to give you an example of where the O1 and the O2, some of the services might break down, you'll see very clearly the O1 is services that are town-wide. So services that are provided to the village. Example, town board, town justice, the clerk, the comptroller, and really senior services and parks are probably the biggest ones that apply to the entire town, regardless if you're in the village or not. The O2 is services that we provide, but the village also provides. So instead of double taxing or providing duplication of services, the town police, for example, are only applied to residents outside the village because the village has their own police, their own code enforcement, their own engineer, and things like that. So the process going forward, the budget calendar, tonight is our community forum. This is a forum we do annually. The town board is very committed to having an open, transparent process to engage residents early in the process. A lot of times, community will come out with a budget at the end of the process and present it, and at that point, it's a little late to engage. This is an opportunity for residents to engage early in the process and have input throughout the process. I will submit my tentative budget by the end of this month, September 30th. The town board will then have the budget, and we'll do a review, and of course, through resolution, the town board can modify and then submit a preliminary budget on the 21st of October. We'll have a public hearing on November 4th, and then plan on adopting the final budget 11/20. I get a question every year, what happens if the board fails to adopt the final budget? And essentially, the preliminary budget becomes the final budget at that point, so it's an automatic at that point. This slide will give you an idea of where we spend our money. And that's always a question, where we raise our money from. That's always a question we get every year. And so $6.3 million comes from the property tax levy on the residents. $2.6 million comes from sales tax. $500,000 or so comes from mortgage tax. And then from there, it gets to be smaller and smaller pieces. So you can see the vast majority of our revenue comes from the property tax, the property owner. And through sales tax, and we'll get into some of the sales tax issues shortly, and of course through mortgage tax. Now if you look at sales tax, mortgage tax, and property tax, that's $9.5 million right there is what we raise through those taxes. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see where our major expenses are. It comes very quickly into focus where our expenses are. $8.2 million wages and benefits, $1.3 million contractual. Now those two lines alone take up that $9.5 million raised in property, mortgage, and sales tax. Our three biggest revenues are consumed really among our top, our number one expense, but with contractual, that's about $9.5 million. And then if you go through, you see it's consumed in gas and salt, debts, payments, leave payouts, and we'll get into what that is. You go through that list, and one thing I think that jumps out immediately for a town this size, where we're not spending our money, to me is the most obvious thing that jumps out. You can see capital investments are not on that list. Paving, purchasing of services through our parks, investing in our parks, those types of things aren't even in the top 8. And for me, I think that's kind of telling of where a community is going, and we have to look at that. $8.2 million in wages and benefits is more than our entire property tax levy, which is 6.3. And that's something where this board has been focused on over the past 6 years. And we'll talk about how we've addressed those issues going forward. In the next slide, we talk about living within our means. Our management principles, one of them being living within our means. And you'll see where we've reduced debt in an upcoming slide. And that's been really an overarching philosophy of the town board for the past 6 years, is that we pay as we go. We rely less on the bonding, less on the borrowing, because essentially that's going to end up costing the taxpayers more in the long run. Where we must, we do. But if we don't have to, we don't. Protecting services while streamlining government is another major focus this town board has had. And I just want to pause here for a moment and talk about that streamlining piece, because it's been a big part of our management initiative over the past 6 years. This past spring, we certified to the state comptroller annual savings of over $300,000 in efficiencies we found in the past couple of years. That has been critical for us to meet our increasing expenses in an environment with decreasing revenues. That has been critical. And one of the things is, it's a 3-year plan, and over the 3 years, we've certified nearly $1 million in efficiencies to the state comptroller. Now, if we stay within the tax cap, which we intend on doing, and we always have, and we've certified the savings, our residents will receive the tax levy increase dollar amount back in a check this fall. So whatever the levy increase is, and for some people it's probably $10, $15 a year, You will receive that back from the state if we meet two criteria. One is to stay under the tax cap, and two is to certify these savings, which we've already done. These savings, which equal $1 million over the next 3 years, 16, 17, and 18, come from the following. We restructured the Receiver of Taxes office, which saved us $46,000 a year. We contracted our cleaning services to a private vendor upon retirement, which saved us $38,000 a year. We restructured the dog control officer position upon retirement, to save us $56,000 a year. We restructured the supervisor's office when in 2013 the supervisor's position was made part-time upon the retirement of the director of operations, saving $20,000 a year. And then consolidated dispatch is expected to save us $150,000 a year. So those savings have been critical for us meeting the target of providing the most efficient government, clearly, but in making sure we meet the tax rebate requirements so you get your tax rebate paid back. Third, we avoid any gimmicks. This is one of the few municipalities I think the town board is very proud of that has not instituted a new fee since the tax cap has been created. Other municipalities have created a $50 garbage fee or a leaf fee or this fee or that fee. When you think about a $50 fee, in your mind, that's not too bad over the course of a year. But that would equate to over a 20-25% tax increase. Now imagine if the town board came out and said they're going to raise your taxes 25%. That equates to about a $50 fee, which other municipalities are doing. This board has avoided that gimmick because that is disingenuous and it breaks the spirit of what the cap is all about. We have not delayed our payments to the retirement system like other municipalities. You can go on a payment plan, which costs you money through interest payments you have to add into the payment. We haven't done any of those things, so we've avoided gimmicks as we've gone. And lastly, we'll get into the slide on it. We've reduced the use of the fund balance. The fund balance is something that I liken it to a savings account that you pay your mortgage out of if you didn't make enough money every month to pay your mortgage. Eventually, you're going to run out of money. And we're going to talk about where this town was in 2010 with the fund balance allocation, where it is today, and where we need to be in the future in the upcoming slides. Our results have been that we've achieved a surplus in two of our major funds, town outside the village, the O2 fund, the B fund, and the highway, the 04 fund, and then the sewer and waters. We've actually achieved surpluses this year, 2014, in those lines. We've reduced the town workforce by 20% through attrition and shared services. There's been no layoffs, there's been no mass firings, but every time a position has become available, including the supervisor's office, nobody's been immune to looking at restructuring workforce. We have looked at how can we deliver the services more efficiently and cheaper, and we've achieved that through attrition and working with shared services. And of course, as I said, a pay-as-you-go philosophy has reduced the town debt load by $6 million since 2010. We're going to lose our light in a minute if someone just click that. One of the things we do to be efficient is we put our lights on timers. So that's the good news. The bad news is we got to keep upping it every once in a while.
Keeps us awake.
What's that?
Keeps us awake.
That's right. So reducing this debt load, $6 million over 5 years, has been tremendous in helping us with our operational expenses. If you look here, the success in reducing fund balance appropriations, when this administration was first elected into office, 2010, we inherited a budget that was using almost $1.4 million of the town's savings account to pay for operational expenses. Again, paying your mortgage with your savings account because you don't make enough income. That was a recipe for disaster. I believe, my philosophy, I think the town board has agreed, is that that was just overextending it. 1 year we were going to run out. And so each year, one of the things we consciously did was reduce our allocation of fund balance appropriation. And in 2010, as you can see, we made very good progress. You get to about 2014, and it becomes more and more difficult to get that last bit off of our dependency. But in 2015, we're about $575,000. So we went from 1.4 to 575,000. This budget I will present to the board will be at 525, so we'll reduce it another 50,000. Minuscule compared to where we want to be, where I want to be. But it is becoming more and more difficult in the tax cap environment to leave that dependency of the fund balance allocation. We talk about personnel costs, and this is a huge component. In 2009, before this administration was elected, our personnel cost was $5.4 million. We have gone into the 2015 budget year at $4.6 million. That's an $800,000 cut in personnel costs, which, if you remember the first slide we did, is our biggest line. That has happened because, unfortunately, we've had to do exactly what we've talked about. We've had to reallocate. We've had to re-look at how departments and positions are staffed. When this administration was first elected, there was about 110 employees townwide. Today, we have 84. 14 of them are part-time. That's a model that is not necessarily good because we are very lean and we are doing things very efficiently. But it has been unfortunately a requirement for us to be able to deliver a budget that taxpayers can afford. And taxpayers probably would take issue with if they could afford, but we're going to get to the tax dollar in a moment so you can see where your tax dollars go when you pay your tax bill. But we've had to reduce the workforce through attrition in order to meet our expenses. When we talk about where our expenses are going, and we take personnel cost here because personnel cost is our biggest driver, and you look at non-property tax revenue, so that's not your tax levy, that's everything else. You can see the line is very stagnant. That's the blue line or black line, I can't tell what color that is, but that's the line below the red line. The red line is the personnel cost, which it continues to grow. In 2020, if the trends continue the way they are, in 2020, that gap will be $3.5 million between our non-property tax revenue and our personnel costs. That's, I think, one of the things the town board, as we look at a budget, not just as an annual snapshot. It isn't just about 2015 or 2016. We look at a budget and project it into the future so we can start to see where we're heading and where we might want to start to try to bend some of these curves. And I think this is one of the curves that the town board is going to spend some time talking about. This is a good slide we like to show because it really gives you a sense of where your taxes go. For every dollar you pay, 66 on the average, 66% or 66 cents goes to the school district. 23 cents goes to Schenectady County. 10 cents goes to the town of Glenville. So we're running our budget on 10 cents of every dollar you pay. The rest goes to other entities. And I think that's interesting because a lot of people think when they pay their bill, unfortunately the town has the assessor, so we do the assessment, and then we have the receiver, and we receive on behalf of the county and one of the school districts anyway. And so some people think we're getting the lion's share of this dollar, and in essence we're running it on 10 cents for every dollar. So for the average home in the town of Glenville, your town tax of your three major funds is somewhere about $500 to maybe $550, your annual tax. So when you think about what you pay, about 500 of that is going to, in rough terms, to the town of Glenville. And that's what we're trying to run our budget on. The challenges we have in 2016 are numerous. Among the many, the big one is the tax cap. Tax cap isn't really, only in New York State is 2%, never 2%. It's something different. And in this case, it's the CPI, which is less than 2%. So it came in at 0.73. The Consumer Price Index came in at 0.73. That allows us for $65,000 in new spending this year. Against that, unfortunately, health insurance is expected to grow by about $100,000. Six-figure growth in the health insurance line is not unusual. In fact, it's the norm. And that's been one of the issues we've been struggling with. And we do have a contract with one of the three bargaining units. That contract will cost this town board, the town residents, $80,000 in new income raises next year. So between those two, that health insurance and that one bargaining unit, that's $145,000 in new spending against the $65,000 tax cap. That's before, again, going back to that slide, we make $1 investment in our parks, we make $1 investment in sewers, capital improvements, this building, a car, a truck, you name it. That right there consumes more than twice our tax cap. And then pilots actually reduce our levy growth, and we'll talk a little bit about our tax base growth. We do have some good news on that front. We are expanding our tax base, which is good. The short term is there's a lot of pilots that the county gives. Town doesn't have a say in that. The county gives the pilot, and that actually hurts our tax base growth because it's reduced off of our growth. It's a quirky flaw in the tax cap law among many of them. But that's one of them that gives us a greater challenge. Continuing challenges for revenue. Our sales tax from the county is locked into 0% growth through 2020. We have, in this county, in Schenectady, there's two people that there are two entities that decide the tax cap sharing formula, the County of Schenectady and the City of Schenectady. The towns are passive bystanders who have to live with the deal that the city and the county make on how they share sales tax. In most counties, as the community grows, Saratoga County is a perfect example, the town, the municipality, grows in the percentage of sales tax it gets from that growth. We do not. For 7 years, we're locked into zero growth. Worse, the previous 7 years, we're 2 years into a 7-year deal right now we're trying to live with. 7 years, prior, it was the same level that it is for the next 7 years. So we're locked into a 14-year 0% growth on sales tax. So this town, like Rotterdam and like Niskayuna, locked into, unfortunately, very little growth in that sales tax. And you remember, that's the second largest revenue line we have. So when mortgage tax falls, because none of us have control over that, and sales tax is flat, there's one place to go for revenue, and it's the property tax levy. And that's the issue in Schenectady County. That's not an issue unique to Glenville. That's a Schenectady County problem. We do get a Metroplex component of our sales tax, and that's been very minimal in increases, very small part of our budget. Our mortgage tax in 2015 is the lowest level it's been in 12 years. And that's been something we've had to absorb as far as revenue source goes. And we don't fully capture the benefits of our economic growth immediately. That's a challenge as well. So to put that in perspective, when you look at this chart, the town expenses versus the sales tax revenue, it's a lot like the other chart we showed. The top line is the town expenses. So if we project out to 2020, they'll be growing at that rate, but yet our sales tax, put it in visual perspective, stays flat. Under this scenario, our gap will increase to $10 million between our expenses and our sales tax revenue by 2020. And again, there's two places to go: mortgage tax, which we don't have any control over, and that's not going to grow. There's only one place to go to get that $10 million gap filled, and that's property tax levy. Now, as I've said, this board has taken a look at the expense side and done everything we can on the expense side to try to prevent that from happening, going to the levy. But we're at a point where we still have to deliver core services, and we still have to be there for the resident. And we're not at the point where cuts can be made any longer to the budget. So our workforce challenges coming up in 2016, nearly 20% of our full-time employees will be eligible for retirement by the end of 2016. We faced this problem in 2015, we faced it in 2014. We have an aging workforce, we're losing people fairly quickly to retirement, and we need to figure out a way of replacing people and having still the institutional knowledge and the talent that our staff currently has after all their years of service. The previous labor agreements were generous with payouts, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because each year for the past 3 to 4 years we've been budgeting fairly significant payouts for retirements to pay for the retirements, and I'll get into that in a few moments. The average leave time payout for a retirement eligible employee is about $40,000. So for every employee that is eligible to retire, we have to factor about a $40,000 cash payment in time that they've accrued over their career here that they cash out under current agreement. So for 2016, that means $250,000 in cash out the door needs to be budgeted. That's a significant number. And that's a number, again, put it against, remembering that we have a $65,000 tax cap, we have $80,000 in new salary, $100,000 in new health, and now $250,000 in employee retirement payout. We have 2 of our 3 labor contracts are expired. We've been working hard with our labor unions in trying to reach an agreement. We've gotten there with 1, we haven't gotten there with 2 others yet. We're working on that. We hope to have something, but that's a challenge. How do we get to a contract when we have these constraints placed on our budget? Healthcare costs are rising faster than the tax cap. Healthcare costs are rising faster than just about anything else you can compare it to. And until the state gives municipalities the ability to control its spending on health insurance, this is going to be the issue for local governments. The tax cap will not be needed if the state allowed the towns and municipalities to control these costs. We do not have an ability. We have to take those rate increases. We're community rated. They come to us every year. We have to accept them and absorb them. Our New York State retirement rates are still at a 30-year high. This year, thankfully, because of the stock market, we're not going to see an increase, as we've been told. I don't know if that's going to hold true for next year based on what the stock market's doing lately. But even without an increase, they are still at 30-year highs. Prior to 2001, this town had virtually no cost in the retirement system. Today, 15 years later, we're over $1.4 million. That's a significant amount of money to absorb into a budget over 14 years. And so even though it's not increasing this year, it's still at a high. We still have uncertainty regarding our costs regarding the 911 dispatch unit. We still don't know what the savings will be. Some of you may have read some things about lawsuits and things like that. Hopefully we'll come to a conclusion on that soon, but we're still not exactly sure what that savings is going to be. And of course, throughout this entire discussion, what has not come up only once, long-term capital investments in equipment and facilities and people. We have not been able, historically as a town, to make investments where we need to make investments in our roads, in our sewers, in our water system. Unfortunately, because everything is consumed in operations. So that brings us to really the end of the presentation. As a quick presentation, I just want to summarize, because I know we'll probably get the question, where are we in the budget this year? And so we've had our budget, our department heads submit their budgets to myself and Jason, the town board. We did the budget hearing for at least half of our departments. The other half will go next week in front of the board with their requests. We're probably $200,000 in rough terms away from getting to the tax cap. So right now, I'm committed, Jason, our management, our board, to staying under the tax cap. We'll submit a budget that's under the tax cap. But that means we have to find savings of roughly $200,000 somewhere in the budget. I will say, as I said in the paper today, and I think the town board would agree, we are our residents should know we're in a very, very strong fiscal position with the town of Glenville. I think this board has done a tremendous job managing these expenses and the revenue challenges over the past 6 years. I'm going to just name 4 things that I think they've achieved to get us to where we need to be. First of all, we've cut debt by $6 million. That frees up a lot of spending annually. It's consumed in the budget. And they held the line on no new debt. That's critical. Number 2, reducing the dependency on the fund balance has been critical to getting us to have the means necessary to begin to make some investments using fund balance. That's what fund balance is about, not using it for operational expenses, but emergencies and capital investments. And so we're finally in the position, after getting to where we got on that chart, where we can start making some investments in capital improvements. Third, they've reduced spending. I've went through the reduction in personnel costs and some other things. They've reduced spending over 6 years that has gotten us into a manageable position for this very tight year. And lastly, and most importantly, the effort of this town board, the staff, the volunteers, Larry's one of our volunteers, and the residents on economic development to expand our tax base has been tremendous. We saw Scotia Glenville School District was able to lower their tax levy. They said because of the expansion happening in the town of Glenville, the business expansion happening. This board has been focused on that for 6 years. And it's gotten us into a position that although we may not be able to cut taxes this year, we certainly can absorb a minimal levy increase going forward. So those 4 things, I'm very proud of the work that the board has done, the staff, and again, the volunteers and the residents. With that, I think we'd like to open up to questions, comments, concerns, anything for myself, the board, the comptroller's here tonight. So anyone have anything at all? I know we have some staff members. If you will have some questions or whatnot, it'd be a good time to ask them as well. They're shaking their head no. Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to know what the outsourcing was for the personnel savings.
Yes, so we had a maintenance helper, that was the position, and at the senior center, and we also had one at town hall. They both retired this year, and so what the board decided to do was contract out for a private cleaning company to take on the cleaning aspect of that job, and we were able to get a private vendor to come in and clean at night as opposed to having it done by staff. And so then what we were able to do is backfill 2 positions with 1 position and then have the cleaning company take up that work, the cleaning work. And that was the savings of about $38,000 a year.
And how does that relate to the cut down from 110 personnel to 84?
Well, that's 1 person. So in that number,
There's 1.
yeah, we went from 2 people down to 1 person in those positions. So we had a maintenance helper at town hall and 1 at the senior center, and now we have the cleaning company and 1 maintenance helper currently between the 2 facilities.
And the pension fund, so you mentioned the funding for all these people who are retiring. So there's New York City pension, New York State pension, and then there's a sliver that is Glenville pension, I guess.
No, so the payouts, so we're part of the New York State retirement system. So we pay New York State whatever they tell us we have to pay them every year to cover our pension responsibility of our employees. That's separate. Once they retire, then they're on the New York State system. They collect their pension from New York State. Every year, the state tells us what we owe. And they base that on a bunch of different factors, one of them being the return on investments in their fund. So if they're having a bad year, we're going to have to pay more. If they're having a good year, we may not have an increase. Might even have a reduction. The payouts we talk about is our employees bank time throughout their career here. So instead of taking personal time or sick time or whatever the time it basically is based on the contract, they bank that. When they leave, they get to cash that out. They just don't lose their time that they've collected over the years. And so it's a formula of their salary. So an average person would bank about $40,000 roughly. And when they retire, that's the cash they take with them. Not a pension, it's just straight out cash. It's not a retirement system.
Some of the unions also have unused sick leave payout, and that can be expensive.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Obviously, we're new here. There are a lot of vacant properties, and I understand that you've mentioned a couple times that mortgage tax is a revenue source, one of the few, but there's no control over it. And I wonder if all of you and others in the community have considered expenses that might make our community more attractive, so that some of these vacant properties are occupied by people who can contribute, whether it's through sales tax or perhaps they'll pay a mortgage, and there'll be mortgage tax, and then perhaps they'll do some capital improvements in their own properties that require a fee for a permit. So this is a gamble, this is a bet, this is not the strategy that you laid out of pay-as-you-go. It's a very conservative strategy, and I'm new here, so I'm not saying it's wrong, but we have a lot of vacant properties. And have you considered any ways of spending money that might come to pass in the future that these properties are full of taxpayers?
Yeah, and I'll just, first of all, welcome.
I'm really thinking residential. I understand that there are commercial properties as well.
Where do you come from?
We own an apartment in Brooklyn, New York, and we're coming your way. So we bought a house on the Fly Road.
Oh, well, welcome, and it's a great town. I think you're gonna love it.
We chose the town, so
Good,
we're
thank you.
in agreement there.
Thank you. We do have vacant properties, and a lot of towns struggle with them. The mortgage tax decrease we're seeing is more in the fact that the refinances have probably dried up than anything. The realtors and the data we're getting on home sales is still pretty strong in the town. Our property values have held up, and we're still selling pretty vigorously in the town. The vacant properties typically are bank foreclosures who unfortunately hold on to them and don't sell them and never file the deeds, so we don't quite know who they are. And code enforcement's been very important in that aspect. We try to stay up on them. This board created the vacant registry. Although it doesn't.
That's commercial.
Yeah, as far as commercial.
And
It is residential. Okay. So we at least have a handle on that and try to stay on top of them because keeping the values are very, very important to that. But I don't know if the board has any thoughts on, spending money on trying to attract a home ownership program, I think is maybe what you're suggesting, or trying to market the properties in a certain
Certainly a whole variety of strategies.
Yeah. I don't know, I mean, we haven't talked about that, particularly to the housing
We think
market.
it's an attractive place.
Yes, it
Get
is.
the word out.
Yes.
How's money?
That's right. That's right. We do have new home developments coming into the town, so I think the word is out there. 134 new homes coming over in the Glen Oaks area. So that's nice, but I know we do have a vacant stock, that we have to deal with. But I think that's true of all communities. And some of it is the foreclosure and the banks and trying to work with the banks. There's one particular on Willow that has been vacant for 20 years. I don't know. I mean, and the bank owns it and just doesn't want to sell it.
We've been trying.
Yeah.
We've been trying.
That's a commercial property.
No.
No,
Residential.
residential.
20 years.
We've been trying.
It's gotta be almost.
He's perfect for some vacant board seats we get.
Yes. See that?
We're gonna really do it.
You come to a meeting to get recruited. See?
I can tell you that in regards to the vacant commercial properties within the town, several years ago when we first got into office, we created a Let's Talk Business Expo, which showcases all of the commercial properties in the town. We invite realtors and bankers and investors and community members, community business members to try to showcase these properties and generate interest, because those are the ones that are more visible, the ones on Freeman's Bridge Road that you see with the for sale signs, and they're vacant and they look a little run down and they don't look quite like the rest of the town. So that had initially been our focus as far as trying to fill those spaces, because a lot of them are in the gateway to the town, and it's been fairly successful. I don't know how many, we started out with what, like 22 properties?
Oh, no.
30, 40?
30.
We're all 40.
Yeah, probably 40.
Yeah.
Down to about 22.
Yeah, so over 5 years, we've, done about half have actually seen development. So it's been, it's been kind of noted within the Capital District that it's a new way. We're the only town that does that. There's no other town that does that type of showcase of our properties for people to come in one spot in a couple of hour time block and see what we have to offer. But I think that, the residential neighborhoods are important to keep them up, and maybe that's something that we need to focus on going forward as well, and not just focus on the commercial properties, but the residential properties, so that the neighborhoods don't see a decline.
I've been in land use planning and community development for 35 years. And it's not that simplistic to say that residential growth is good or all commercial growth is good. In my opinion, the healthy community is that community that's in balance. You know, you'll hear a lot of use of the term sustainability, and that makes me shudder, that word. I think, in my opinion, communities are organic things like anything else, like a plant or an animal, and as such, they need to grow, and they need to grow in a healthy and balanced manner. And that's what we're trying to achieve here. I don't think it's simplistic to say that you can just have residential growth or commercial growth or industrial growth. You need to preserve your open spaces. You need to have a vibrant real estate market and residential land use as much as you do commercial and industrial, and you need to keep things in balance, and that's what we're trying to achieve. Chris and I have had many academic and sometimes not academic discussions about the cost of residential growth. I think it's largely contingent upon the expenses associated with providing residential services, not the least of which is education in New York State. And you'll note that the 66 cents out of every dollar goes to public education. That is an inordinately high expense for the educational service when you compare it to other states. So residential growth, when it occurs, in my opinion, he would differ, costs more than it produces in revenue. In this current condition, I think New York State is struggling to try and turn that around and bring that into balance, but right now that's the case. And so we've been pushing for a little harder for commercial industrial growth because they obviously don't have the educational expense, or they don't incur the educational expense or the demand for that service. So that's what we're trying to achieve, though, is basically getting this community in balance and growing in a balanced fashion.
One of the things I failed to mention was that what is unique to Glenville is the property tax distribution, meaning that in Glenville, most of the levy is on the backs of the residents as opposed to commercial. That's not true in Rotterdam, and that's not true necessarily in this community to the extent that it is in Glenville. So our residents feel that levy a little bit more than other residents because we don't have the Rotterdam business base, we don't have the GEs in our town like Niskuna has. Now, that's what's changing. That's what this board immediately noticed in 2010 and went to work on trying to expand the commercial base to try to spread that levy out more equitably or more evenly and try to put it more on the commercial base. And that's where we're starting to achieve 6 years later. Again, that's something that's going to happen 10 years down the road. We'll be gone, but this town will be in much better shape because of the commercial growth we're seeing today.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else? Questions? Larry, you look like you have a question. You're not going to ask about the Burn Hills youth program? Because your wife probably wants to know. Anything else on this side? Oh, Larry.
Burn Hills Youth Program.
No cuts to youth programs this year so far. You got to wait till October 20th for the
I got a few things.
Yeah.
You know, the budget time of the year, I took a two-year hiatus because I tried to do something else, but it's a very frustrating time of the year for all of us because we put a lot of effort and we put our whole heart and soul into it to try to do what's right. And you know, there's a couple folks running against us in this upcoming election, and I'd like to ask them some questions if Jared and Heather are here who are running against us. No, they're not here. It's ironic that you put this forum on to educate the residents on what we go through. And on or about November 4th, this room will be packed with Monday morning quarterbacks who are ill-informed because they didn't take the time to educate themselves on what we go through and what we're trying to do, number one, or they're agenda-driven for whatever reason, and it's frustrating that we have to go through this year after year, that you lay this all out, and then in probably 2 months, this room is going to be packed full of people that have no clue what they're talking about, nor do they want to be educated on what we go through. So I see these folks that are running against us in this upcoming election out there, you know, chatterbox on what they think is we're doing wrong, but they don't want to come here and educate themselves. So I just, you know, it frustrates me every year that in a couple months, we're gonna have to sit up there and listen to a bunch of garbage from folks who have no clue because they don't want to educate themselves. So I just had to get that out. That's all.
Thank you. I'm disappointed I'm so glad you guys are here tonight, but it's so sparsely attended, it does get a little frustrating. Because the whole
staff among us.
Yeah, there's 3 staff members here. Volunteer, Larry's a volunteer. And then our 3 staff members are here. Highway, water and sewer, water and sewer.
Last week we had a board meeting that there was a lot more because they had department meetings. So tonight is more of a work session, things that they are already aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's great, the staff.
And we got more next Wednesday too, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right, the rest of the departments. But we could use more involvement, absolutely. We do this purposely in the beginning of the process for the simple fact that we want people to understand the challenges. And if they have input, this is the best time to have it, actually. So we will continue to do it, regardless if there's 1 person or 50, we'll keep doing it. And it's not the end of the process. Any questions going forward, any concerns, contact us. You can reach me here, or I can get to the town board, whatever you want to do. Thoughts or questions, concerns? Thank you. I think the good news is that we're on a solid foundation, no question about it. We're doing very well. I'm very proud of where we are as far as the budget's concerned. Challenges, absolutely, and going forward, we're just going to meet them like we've continued to meet them. So thank you for coming, and look forward to aggressive budget here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.